Welcome to PwC IFRS Talks, your source of all things IFRS, technical accounting matters, business issues, current standard setting and regulatory updates. I'm your host, Ruth Preedy. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the future of reporting. I feel like I need a bit of music.
Or get a crystal ball out.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And I'm joined by the lovely Mark O'Sullivan. Welcome back, Mark.
Thank you very much for having me.
And recently you brought out a very exciting report called Reporting Reboot, which, as I think I mentioned to you before, I read that as Reporting Robot, which I would like.
Probably yes.
I'd like it changed
exactly.
to Copyright Ruth. And it's all around how technology is transforming reporting. So before we get into the detail, could you give us a little bit of background about what led you to write it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think at one level, technology is disrupting every walk of life. But having been involved in the reporting agenda and theoretically debates about the future of reporting, today's reporting model felt relatively immune to that dynamic. Most of the talk was still around what companies report. Yes, companies have dabbled with the racy end of reporting, like PDFs and websites and maybe infographics. But it was, the discussion was still what companies report and when, rather than how they report it and to whom. And I think that, at one level, fascinated me. Also, I suppose, slightly, I know nothing about technology, so I thought it'd be an interesting way to find out about it.
You know a lot now.
Well, more. From a low base.
I love an interactive PDF.
Exactly.
Don't get rid of that. So what are some of the technology trends that you talk about in the report?
Yeah, I think that we were dipping our toes into the sort of murky waters of technology. So we didn't want to do a deep dive. We wanted to just sort of understand various different technologies. So we sort of skimmed across, the traditional ones. iXBRL, blockchain, data visualization, natural language technologies, and we just started to sort of understand how some of that is being either used today or could change reporting in the future. So we were looking at things like how machine learning can access and analyze great swathes of data and sort of how XBRL might help tag various different data points and help that process, as well as how things like blockchain might affect the transfer of data and therefore the confidence in the quality of the data. Those sort of things we were just looking at.
And one of the things that I love in the report, and I quote, it says, data is at the heart of the change. And working on some of this internally at PwC, this to me is fundamental, that everything is down to the data.
Yes.
Again, can you expand a little bit more on that? Because we've had the concept of big data for a while.
Yeah, it's been around for a long while, and I think what we're starting to see is technology. I keep saying emerge, and then when I talk to the guys that are focused on technology, they say it's already here. So, yeah. But I'll keep using the phrase, and then they can. But the technology is sort of here to allow us to access and analyse that data far more than we've seen. So we've got quite a rigid regulatory reporting framework, but what we're starting to see and hear is that investors and analysts are accessing great swathes of data to inform their investment decisions. So they're still relying on the traditional data, but they're looking at things like they're accessing or buying access to the sort of footfall data that comes out of the geolocation shenanigans that goes on in your mobiles. They're tracking exactly. Big Brother is watching, and therefore they're able to almost forecast before companies report footfall data on stores. Well, that's transformational. It just means that they're almost in a position to understand it and forecast a company's performance before they've even reported, and then use the reported information as a way of corroborating at this stage. And as you start to unpick a lot of this, you recognise that actually companies' reported information will remain important, but its relative importance is going to continue to decline over time, and data is at the heart of that.
A bit of data. My football data, I think, would be in and out of a coffee shop.
Yeah, well, exactly.
More coffee.
Yeah, coffee shops, and the forecast of them will be going through the roof.
So you mentioned at the beginning, like what the traditional
Yeah.
reporting model is sort of at the moment has hidden itself a little bit, and what is being challenged there?
Well, I think it's the reliance on it, the waiting for that information that is beginning to decline. I mean, we spoke to an investor that kind of at the back of a fag packet sort of analysis said, well, actually, we used to rely predominantly on the sort of company reporting to us at set points during the year, and now we probably rely on that. Sort of 70% of our analysis is based on that. But you fast forward 5 years, so we went out and talked to investors, and investors said, well, in 5 years, it's going to be down at sort of 20%, and actually it's going to be far more about real time and data and using multiple sources, of which company source data is just one.
Yeah, and okay, so you mentioned there, so you think using the annual report, I suppose, potentially will go smaller. And you mentioned their live data.
Yeah.
Like, do you think there's a time when we might actually have like live, up-to-date information all the time on a company, and people could just like rather than the annual report?
I think the jury. I mean, I think undoubtedly we're moving to that world. If you think about, data is available on all things we do, or more and more of the things we do, and I suppose that will only continue to grow in terms of the data that's available. So I think where we stand, the forecast is absolutely. Does it need to be all the data all the time? I think if you talk to a number of users of that information, there's some information they want on a more regular basis.
Yeah.
But other information they just want updated as and when.
Yeah.
It's not, they don't expect it sort of regular. So I don't think it's all data,
Yeah.
all available all the time. I think what we'll start to see is certain data points will be expected to be available on a far sort of more routine, real-time basis.
They don't want their deferred tax and their daily.
Well, who does?
Totally developed.
Well, that's
Okay, so you also said there that analysts will use these wide data sources and all this, lots and lots of data. Obviously, the big issue or discussion point here is how do we trust all this data and this live data that we'll potentially start using?
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing challenge, and one that, as a profession, we need to ask ourselves. Are we in the future going to be auditing the data, or are we going to be auditing the algorithms that produce the data? I think technology itself is going to help users trust data more. I mean, we're already starting to see, the views of the crowd allowing people to actually gain confidence in some of the information that's produced. So, if it's by getting people to comment on data or accessing it from multiple sources, I think that will lend itself. You've got the concept, I suppose, of unconscious bias. So if you get machines to actually analyse the data and produce, as some brokers already do, producing the reports, if they start to produce or write information that doesn't feel right, doesn't look right, doesn't sound right, then that may already start to signal that there's an issue with the underlying data as it is. But again, then you get into the whole ethical nature of AI, and how do you make sure that unconscious bias doesn't actually permeate through the programming of the systems as well. So I mean, it's a minefield out there, but I think trust is going to have to be built in this information. I think it's going to come from various different sources, not just us as auditors, us as accountants.
Big, like, all trust is at the heart of all. Well, data's at the heart of all of us, and then we need to trust it. Okay, really helpful. So coming towards the end, if companies are listening thinking, okay, so what should I be thinking about now? Have you got any sort of tips of what they should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think change is inevitable. I think we need to front up to that.
They don't just rip up their annual.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's still got to happen. It will for a number of years. But I think what we've heard is that change is coming, and arguably it's sooner than a lot of people think. I mean, I think all players in the reporting model need to stand up and take notice of that, and I think regulators themselves need to be far more proactive in thinking about how they create a regulatory framework in a different environment. But for companies specifically, I think in order to they need to keep up with technological developments. I always struggle to say that. I think they need to begin to be more of to think about two-way communication. Gone are the days where they controlled the tap of information from them to the users. Users are using multiple sources, And so companies need to be more proactive at listening at what's being said about them, proactive in terms of putting information out there. They need to not try and manage their story. I think they need to recognise that things will be said about them and they need to be responsive. I think they need to think about, in the world, various audiences. I mean, I think there's a big push, IXBRL is being talked about and being, machine readable information, but we still got to recognise there are humans out there.
Yeah.
So that balance between machine and human readable needs to happen. And they need to, as I say, to be authentic, be accountable, and build processes that sort of avoid that unconscious bias in the way that they analyse, assess, and then communicate information. I think that's at the heart of it will help them build trust in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. I could talk about this all day. I think we've come to the end of our time, so do join us again soon. And the name to reporting robot.
I will. I'll go back and do that now.
I am a reporting robot. Just did a slight little robot dance there.
You did.
Just my arms. This is why
good
I'm
for the
on
radio.
TV. Exactly. Okay, well, thank you, Mark, for joining us. I've been your host, Ruth Preedy. To find the report, is it on pwc.com?
It is indeed.
Brilliant. So find it on pwc.com. Happy accounting. The preceding programme was brought to you by PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP. This content is for general information purposes and is not a substitute for consultation with professional advisors.